Okay, so let's go ahead and get started by creating our wood grains. Now, I always have a specific workflow that I use to create my wood grains, and then once that workflow I've run through it, then I just go ahead and I polish things up to make them look more like this. So if we have a look, for example, so this is the one that I want to use for the wood grains, a few key focus points. There is a difference between sometimes having these really white wood grains and sometimes having much thinner ones that you can see. So here you can see like really white, and then you can see them going very thin again and back and forth, back and forth. That's something I want to capture. Another one is that the wood grains warp around our knobs or knots or whatever you want to call them, the ends. And of course that they have the ends. So the warping that we have around here, that's something that I also want to capture. And one thing that's pretty cool is that you can see that it has like these little fibers over here. Now, this kind of depends on resolution. We can give it a go and see if we can make it. Although it would most likely just turn into a little bit like noise from like a larger perspective. Because from over here it's hard to see. But that's no problem, because that noise is still something to just add some extra surface detail to this. And add to that like some deeper or thicker slashes, whatever you want to call them, in here. So that's the ones that we will also add. And then on top of that, it's just going to be like some small balancing and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the plan. Now to create my wood grains, the first thing that I need to do is we need to create a gradient map that we can turn into the grains. This gradient map, it's basically going to be long streaks. That's basically what it's going to be. So let's say that I often just start with like a grunge. Let's say grunge map 002, for example. And now the way that this works is, so we have grunge map 002. Let's say that we set our contrast quite up. And we do want to actually get like a bunch of like smaller streaks. So let's say we have something like this. Now what I like to do is I always like to go for direction, and I always like to go for horizontal direction when it comes to most materials. Sorry, I lost my voice there for a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a transform map. Now, sorry if I went a bit quickly for this. I should say I do expect that you know the basics of Substance Designer. And the basics in this case is most of the time I will just press spacebar and I will type in whatever I need. So if I need a transform, I will type in TRA and then press enter to get the transform 2D. Or you can use your arrow keys up and down to basically navigate like that. So just keep that in mind. So for the rest, this course will not so much be about explaining how the actual program works, but more explaining about like how to create the materials, the thought process behind them, what the tools actually do, stuff like that. So we have a transform, and then if we go down here, we want to press one of the 90s. So this will just simply rotate it into a 90-degree angle. Now what we're going to do is we need to add a directional blur, because we need this to be not sharp, but we need this to be like soft gradients. So for our directional blur, if you just type in DI and you get the directional blur, you basically want to keep the angle at 0, but set the intensity very strong to like 500 or something like that. So that's what you get then, is you get these really streaky lines over here, something like this. Now with these lines, they are now way too sharp. So these are not actually going to be our grains. So these are way too sharp. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and we need to, for example, blur them. This time a normal blur. And for that, I want to use a blur high quality grayscale. So what this one will do is it will just nicely, as you can see, blur my lines so that we get all of these really light streaky lines that we have over here. Now at this point, you can pretty much just play around with, like, for example, adding a histogram scan. And what a histogram scan does, if you just type in HIS, the histogram scan allows you to basically change the levels. So you have like the position and the contrast. And this can sometimes be just nice to have. So here you can see you can like make it stronger or less strong. What I tend to do is I tend to add this on here and just pick like a general position that I like. For example, 0.65 in the position. And then at least while it is here, I can change it later on if needed. Okay, perfect. So what we're going to do now is, so now these will be transformed into streaks. You cannot see it yet, but trust me, they will be turned into streaks a little bit later on. I now want to add some general warping. General warping is the stuff that you can see Not so much around the knobs, but it's just like some general, here see, you can see some general moving around, and here you can see like some bumps and everything. It is not perfectly straight, also over here you can see that. The way that I tend to do this, because at this point we are still quite flexible with it, is by adding something called a directional warp. And a directional warp is pretty cool. So what you can do is you can input a grayscale map into this. And then what it will try to do is it will try to warp your textures around this grayscale. Now for this warp, if we go to our patterns in our library, we can use a tile generator over here. Basically what we want to do is we want to get a bunch of different dots, and those are the ones that will be warped around it. To get these dots, you want to scroll down to the pattern, and the tile generator is quite a big node. We will cover it more in depth later on when we create our planks. But for now, you can just go to your pattern and set this to be, I don't know, like a paraboid, for example, and that will give you all of these little dots. Now we need to have some variation in this. If we scroll down to size, we can set a scale random, which will just give it some random scale. If we scroll down to position, we can give it a position random over here on the X and on the Y. So that will give us some position random like this. Luminance random will basically make them darker or lighter. This will also affect how strongly that they will be affected by the directional warp. So just like a bunch of variation. You can try rotation if you want, but it won't actually do much. And then for the blending mode, let's set this to max. Setting the blending mode to max, as you can see, it will just decide how we intersect together. If we set this to max, they will just kind of like cut each other off, like this. So we got almost like this really fun looking shape, like a bubble shape. I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like the ball pits that you have in like McDonald's or something like that for some reason. You would eat a lot more. But basically, we plug this into our directional warp. And then as soon as we move our warp angle up, you can see that we get something like this. Okay, so we have now our directional warp. The first thing that I notice is that we probably need to blur it a lot. So let's add a blur high quality grayscale behind it. So that, there we go. See, that looks a bit more logical. We don't want to have it sharp, so just nicely blur it. And then in your directional warp, maybe like move around with the intensity. See, it's just going to give out some general random bumps into our mesh, like that. Okay, so at this point, what we're going to do is now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and probably turn this already into grains. Yes, we need to do that in two ways. So first of all, we have this one over here. I'm just having a think if I should do the knobs first or later. But that's the cool thing about procedural texturing. It doesn't matter if I need to do it later. I can just add it later. So how are these grains going to work? The way that we are going to do this is we are going to use a gradient map. So if you go ahead and press space and type in gradient map, you get this map over here. Now with this map you can basically map colors based upon the gradients, and that's why this needs to be blurry. When this is blurry, it will have 255 different gradients. So as you can see, we can get a lot of grains out of this. Even if you look at it like over here, because of the bitmap ratio, you can even see that over here you almost see like grains. It kind of like feels like that. So we are just going to make those more intense. I'm not going to lie, this is going to be a tedious process. So basically all we need to do is go into our gradient editor, and it's a bit time consuming, but just make your gradient editor quite large to make it a bit easier for you. And you basically click on your gradient pieces like once, like this. Now you are going to click very close, so you have black, you click once again, white. Click very close next to that, black. Click very close next to that, white. Click very close next to that, black. And then white. Now what you will see happening is if we do this about 100 times or something like that. So yes, as I said before, it is tedious. But you can start seeing that we are starting to slowly map out these little grains over here. And the closer we have them together, the thinner the grains are going to be. So we are just going to keep mapping this closer together like this until we get probably to around the midway point or slightly above it. And then we can see just how it looks. So over here, you can see me. Or you can see me. You can see the grains slowly like starting to appear over here. Now, if they are not large enough, we can always just try and like select this and try and move this a little bit closer all together, just by kind of clamping this all down. Sometimes this is needed just to get it exactly in the right spots. Here, see, so now we get these thinner grains. And yeah, so this will take a while. But in the end, we only need to do this once, and then the grains are looking really good. And what I recommend is that you literally just save these grains. If you ever make wood again, you can just save this stuff, and then you can just apply it again. So here, if you want, you can also do it like this, where you, for example, place two next to each other, and then you just move that one closer together. As you can see, so that can also be a solution. It just kind of depends on what you want to do. Like you can see over here. And now if you keep doing that many times, in the end, it will have filled up most of the space except for some very large areas. So over here, we kind of need to get to the point where we hit just the right grayscale, because often the grayscale here, sometimes it can just, as you can see, here, see, you can see that it sometimes just takes a while before it actually applies the grains wherever we want them to have. So that's why it is just something that takes a bit. But yeah, so what we're actually going to do, I'll talk while doing this, and else I might just pause the video and just do it off camera. But basically what we're going to do after this is we are also going to make some grains that are very white. And then we are going to blend between the two. And that will create that effect that I was talking about, where we have some grains that are very widely distanced from each other. And then also some grains that are very closely together. And it will just give us some nice variation. Once that's done, we can add some knobs on top of them and start warping those all together nicely. And that should do the trick. Here, see? Here, you already start to really see it. Although they are still quite far together, or quite far away. But what we can also do is we can also mess around a little bit more with the blur later on. For example, if we close this, and now let's say that we go into our blur. Let's see if we tone down our blur. Here, see? You can see if you tone down your blur, you can basically almost control how closely together the grains are. Of course, we need a bunch more grains for this, but I just wanted to show you that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and I will pause the video and I will do this stuff up until there are almost no changes happening anymore. That will most likely be around this area over here. So we'll see how it goes, but it's literally just me doing this and I don't feel like that's really worth recording half an hour of me doing this. So I'm sure that there are faster ways of doing it, but this way always just works really well for me. And I'm stubborn. I'm quite stubborn, so I like to just stick with my workflow. So, let's go ahead and pause the video until this is done. Here we go. So, I just went ahead and I just kept going. And then near the end, I found that, yeah, the edges, they did not really have that much of an effect anymore. So, I just went ahead and did at a bigger spacing to save some time, because they didn't really do much anymore. So now that we have this stuff, you can see that now we start to sort of get some grains. Don't worry, this is far from what we actually are going to get in the very end. But now what we want to do is we want to blend this together using a mask that has some wider grains. For this, let's first of all get started by creating the wider grains. They are going to be a bit easier, don't worry. So they are basically going to be here, let's move this over here, like a pattern. Oh, no, not a pattern. Let's do a gradient linear, because these all look a little bit like gradients. So let's do a gradient linear 1, like this, which is just a simple gradient. But then if we set the tiling really high to 256, for example. Yeah, 256 seems about fine. You can see that it will just give us these really long pieces over here. Now, at this point, what we're going to do is maybe use a histogram scan once again and just mess around a little bit more with the values to make them here less or more strong. You can also play around with your contrast, basically. Like that. Okay. And now what we're going to do is we are going to basically warp this all around to get these really strong streaks. For this, we're going to add a directional warp. And then with this direction warp into the gradient, we are going to grab a purlin noise over here, which is quite a nice noise. And it's basically just like these really soft looks. So you basically can set this quite low, a bit like this. And you just kind of like throw this into your direction warp and set the warp up. And then you get this effect over here. Yeah, you can see with so many little lines that your computer screen cannot really keep up. So just like trying to zoom in and just try to have like a general look and see how they are like kind of like warping all the way along. So let's set this to around 4. There we go. That will give us like some nice warping. Now with this warp done, we can now go ahead and we can add a warp node. And a warp node will basically be from all directions. And what we can try to do is then warp it using this directional warp over here, which will hopefully get like a interesting look. Let's see. So here, so it will also give us like a little bit more of like these looks over here, where we get like all of these little lines sitting in. The only thing that's new to me is that they are very sharp, but everything is 16 bits, right? Let's go up here, output 16. Yeah, everything is 16 bits, so that's interesting that it looks so sharp. That is quite new. Maybe they changed something around in this graph. It should not really be a problem, so we can basically just warp this along here and don't make it too intense, something like that, for example. And if we then go ahead and let's now add like a blur high quality grayscale, and that will hopefully get rid of the sharpness a little bit. Let's do 0.1 in our blur. There we go. So that will hopefully get rid of the sharpening a little bit. So we now have like these really much larger warps. We can also still play around with our warping to get it like less or more strong. Maybe we actually want to go for like some more softer warps like this. I'm not sure yet. It all depends on how it looks in the end result. But for now, let's say that we have something like this. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we are going to blend these two together. And what I often find the easiest way to blend them together is to, yes, grab a blend node. So you just type in blend. And you blend this one and this one together over here. Into your gradient map. Just go ahead and convert your gradient map back into a grayscale by selecting this line and typing in GR, which is the grayscale conversion node. Because this is a height map, we don't need to have the height map to be color. In terms of the mask, to decide where everything becomes, what we're going to do is we are going to add another gradient map. But don't worry, this one will not be as difficult. And for this gradient map, let's go ahead and let's do like, let's click once. So we have black. Let's do white. Yeah, and I'm just kind of like pushing this all together. And then white again. And I'm just going to see if I can get like, let's see, let's do black again. Just try to like get like an interesting mask somewhere. Let's delete this white over here. Oh yeah, here that works better if we delete that white. So we can basically now go ahead and we can also make this like a little bit softer if we want. And we just want to see if we get like a mask that is like on an interesting location. And you can kind of just move these things around to get more or less of the mask. So for me, I don't want to have too many of these really thick lines. So I think something around this area is quite nice. That we still have like a little bit. I'm not too happy yet about this area over here, but we'll see how it looks. I'm just guessing here, so I don't know. I go ahead and input this into my opacity. And once again, I need to add a grayscale conversion node. And now what you will see happening, although it is the wrong way around, I believe. So let's go ahead and just plug these in the other way around. There we go. So now what we should see, it's a bit hard to see, but now you have your gradient map. And then you can see that we are inserting some of these like really small bits. And coincidentally, because this one often masks the gradients, it is masking the gradients exactly in the areas that are very plain looking and very uninteresting looking. So I basically add this stuff over here, but I still keep in a bunch of like these really small bits. And then I can go back into my gradient and then I don't even need to open it. I can just go in here and I can like see if I want to like increase or decrease the amounts that I have over here until we get something that's a bit interesting. Like right now what I feel is Let's see. It is replacing a lot of stuff. That's what I feel right now. If I go ahead and I temporarily just add an invert grayscale over here, just to see how it works, or what it does. Yeah, so the invert grayscale is not very good. Oh, wrong one. I need to open up this one. So let's go ahead and let's see. So if I tone this down, it should show me a lot less of this stuff. Correct? Or should I actually move this up a lot more? I think what I need to do is I need to move it up, and then I just use my white slide or my black slider actually. Over here to get like more of this masked out. It takes some time to get everything looking correct, because right now I feel like it is using these really simple grains a majority of the time. But I do not want that. I want to have like the complex grains, and then I'd rather just have like these ones over here being replaced. So that's what I'm trying to get. So let's see, these warps are the ones over here. So I'm just trying to kind of like, maybe if I like invert this, just by swapping around my black and my white slider. I'm not sure if that... Nah, so we don't want to invert this. It was already correct. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Normally, normally it's not this difficult to get the mask right. I wonder... I'm honestly not sure what I'm going to do with this, which mask I want to get. There are different ways that we can do this. We can, for example, also add like a histogram scan and add this to our blur, and then use the position and the contrast to basically control roughly where we want to have our blending to be. So that is quite similar to what we have over here, for example. And you then plug this one in, and then you can also go in here and you can also like set the position and everything like that. So I don't know, maybe that's an easier way of doing it in this case, because normally your gray map does give you a bit more control, but I feel like in this case it does not actually work. So that stuff is fine. Let's see, this stuff I want to keep, which I'm pretty much keeping, and this stuff. So I think that, yeah, okay, that should be fine. I think this will look quite nice. So at this point we have some very, very basic grains. We still need to turn them into actual, like these really fine grains. But that's what we're going to do in the next chapter. So let's go ahead and continue with this in the next chapter.